What actually happened to you after being on a raw vegan diet for 16 years?
Okay, so I had a stroke, and fortunately it wasn't that serious, but when I was being examined to determine what was wrong, I had a problem walking. All of a sudden, my right leg wasn't functioning the right way. It's like when a puppeteer pulls on the strings, like all the strings weren't there and the leg just wasn't behaving. And to make the long story short, I had a CAT scan and an MRI done in my brain, things that I normally would avoid, particularly the CAT scan. And it showed not only that I have a recent stroke, thank God not one that paralyzed me or caused any major problems, but it also showed previous infarcts or death of brain tissue that happened previously, and they can't determine exactly when, but there were several of them, and I was just shocked, and caused me to really reevaluate my health program and what I've been doing since 1999 and even earlier, and this event.
He's identified maybe like 4 top reasons why this may, but not definitely, have happened to him. And I guess we're going to get into the first one, David. Let's talk about stress, right?
Right, definitely. I also want to add that I was told by several of my experts that I consulted, and I consulted people who are experts in this, not only from the allopathic community, but the naturopathic community and really all health modalities, including Chinese medicine. Obviously, I went through quite a bit when I determined this because, I have 2 young children and a family and a wonderful partner, and I want to be around, so I really investigated carefully, and what really struck me from that was my naturopathic guru told me that if I weren't raw and I weren't vegan, I would probably be, quote, 6 feet under, and he was dead serious. But my improvements in my health that happened after I became vegan and raw, although I was mostly vegan before I knew what raw food was all about or natural hygiene, the fact that the tone of my blood vessels or other issues in my body were helped and improved with a raw vegan diet probably saved my life.
Well, let's talk about stress and how that may have played a role in what happened to you.
Because nobody really knows or understands why a person has a stroke or a heart attack. There are identifiable issues that go along with those illnesses. One of them is a stress factor, and I have to recommend this. It's a mainstream a fellow named Dean Ornish, and he wrote a book about all the factors really that affect health, and talks about the necessity of stress management. And I have a life that's full of stressors, like most people do, and people manage stress differently. You have to be sure what you're talking about. The stress is okay, and most people are set up to be able to handle stress okay, but when there's chronic stressors and intense stressors over a period of time, your body really isn't set up for that. The fight or flight response is supposed to be that. It's fight or flight, and when you get stressed out and your body reacts, it's not supposed to be continual. It's supposed to be like the lion has just appeared, but then he went away. It's like you kind of get a reaction, but it's not supposed to sustain itself. But when it does over time, that's the effects of stress. So it isn't the stress itself that kills you, because stress is a killer. It can be. It's the way you react. So Sir John talked about stress management techniques are very important. That's why I mentioned that he wrote a very interesting book about it, and he's an MD. But there are a lot of people in the raw food movement who are knowledgeable about this, and other health modalities that are knowledgeable about this. But the bottom line is to be able to get back to homeostasis when you get riled up, and your brain can really do amazing things to you that may not be there in reality. You'll have a reaction to a grizzly bear coming at you, but if you think there's one outside your door and there really isn't, there's no reason why you should have the same reaction as if he were really there. So, but things like yoga, and you mentioned yoga, and just meditation, whatever that word means to you, it just basically means to come into yourself and relax and tune into your breath and tune into your bodily functions and not be upset by environmental cues and stimulus, but just to be able to relax and get your body just in a totally relaxed state. Not all the time, but a good part of the time, and that's what we're talking about, managing stress. So to answer your question, to get at what I think is and by the way, this is all what I think. You'll hear differences of opinion from probably everybody you talk to, but stress is really a common denominator for a lot of problems, and I guess I can sum it up briefly by telling you what a Chinese doctor friend of mine said, doctor of Oriental medicine who taught at a university in, I think it was Beijing, very knowledgeable woman, been seeing a lot of people over lots of years, and she said to me when I discussed my issue with her that she has patients who come in and she could have somebody in perfect health, nothing wrong, pulses are good, everything looks good, but they have severe health challenges. I won't go into what they could be, but they really could be anything. And then she said that she could have another patient who's overweight, grossly obese, does drugs, drinks, smokes, and also has no health issues at that time, although they're predisposed to having some in the future. But the point that she was making was, it's a function of your frame of mind. The fellow who was in really great shape and didn't have any signs of health problems had severe health problems come suddenly, and she identified them as relating to his extremely stressful life and his constantly stressful situation, which made one aspect of his, which really kind of took over everything else. Doesn't matter how healthy you are, but if you're physiologically out of balance because of stressors, which is what it does to you by nature. I mean, we're supposed to be kind of bent out of shape when you're being chased by a tiger or you have some threatening event, but our minds don't really perceive reality with non-reality about stressors. You know, everybody hears something, they freak out, and horrible things are going to happen, and most of the time they don't. But the point is that excitement, if it carries over, will affect you long term, and that's what we're talking about with stress. So being fully aware of your situation, as mindful as you can be, as conscious and aware as you can be, will be a health. What's the word? Health will help improve your health. So that's the point with that. So the state of your psychological state, emotional state are all tied together, and all of this is certainly helped by being a raw vegan. If you're an animal eater, a meat eater, cooked food eater, although there's no problem with some cooked food, but I'm talking about like deep fried something or other, it affects your ability to deal with stress in spite of meditating or whatever else, or in spite of your genetics or whatever. It's not as important as your frame of mind, and all these things are tied together. As exemplified by this one book I read by Dean Ornish called The Spectrum. And by the way, there's many books I could recommend, but that was one that really brings in all the factors.
Awesome, David. So yeah, so stress, one of the factors this situation may have happened to David. But yet another one, David, is that you didn't start a raw foods diet until a little bit later in your life. You've only been doing this for 16 years, and you don't look a day over 50. But I one of the things that is that
you're telling how old I am.
Yeah. Well, we've all gone through this life and through this journey. Unless you're raised as a child as a vegan, and your mom was a vegan, and you ate clean, we're all coming to the plant-based diet with previous health conditions and a previous health level, based on what we did previous, and a lot of people fail to forget this, and sometimes you need to heal through all this stuff and be extra prudent in your diet to heal the damage that was already done. So David, do you want to talk about some of the maybe pre-existing conditions that you learned about only after this event?
Sure. So in relative to what you're saying, relevant to what you're saying is a lot of people get into the raw food movement or the vegan movement or natural hygiene or whatever it is in this genre because they have health problems and they're looking for another way to deal with their health in their life. What I found in my case is my blood work that I had done and the medical tests that I had done, I normally wouldn't do. Like I mentioned before about the CAT scan, I really just think it's unhealthy, that kind of radiation, but sometimes you don't have a choice. And when I had my problem, I went to a medical facility. Really, I was kind of forced into it, but that's another story. Had this CAT scan, and then they were able to determine that I've had previous strokes, like they call them TIAs, or sometimes they're not even noticeable, and people can have a blocked blood vessel in their brain. So this showed these previous problems. So I'm asking myself, why did I have those problems? Why am I having this problem? And this blood work, normally I wouldn't do that kind of intense blood work, and I would normally not have a CAT scan, but as a result of all that, maybe it was a wake-up call, it helped me determine that certain of my blood values were way out of whack for a healthy person. Healthy person determined by global standards, not healthy determined by, let's say, American averages. And what I mean is, for example, my blood fats were intensely analyzed, and I was very surprised to find out. Let me preface it by saying certain fats in your blood. I'm specifically talking about omega fats, and there's a bunch, I think like 12 or more that have been identified. So, about 12 or so omega fats. There's many kinds of fats, but the omega-3s and omega-6s, I'm sure everybody's heard about this. People say, well, that's why you have to eat fish, because of the omega-3s and this and that. But the bottom line to all that is my balance of omega-6s to omega-3s was way out of whack. It was something like, at the time of the stroke, somewhere around 16 to 17 to 1. The healthiest country in the world, or healthiest people in the world, the Japanese, Asians, Okinawans, those type of people. Well, studies were done that shows that their ratio of 6 to 3 is really around 3 to 1, or a little less, down to about 1.5. You do need you do need omega-6s. I'm not saying you shouldn't have omega-6s. They're an inflammatory fat, whereas omega-3s are the opposite. So it's good to be non-inflammatory in a healthy state, and 3s help that, and that's maybe one of the reasons why the Japanese are so healthy. They don't have cardiovascular disease like we do, stroke like we do, or other problems like we do. So they get a high omega-3 intake in their diet from fish. So, and I don't eat fish, but when I determined that balance was out of whack, and that could have affected my stroke because it caused arterial blockage over time, having high 6s and other fats that are problematic, coupled with, we'll talk about it as sugar, could help you become more prone to getting cardiovascular disease, meaning blockages in your arteries, meaning like little patches of fat that have caused a problem, and then your body goes into a normal repair mechanism, but that kind of backfires sometimes, and then you could have a piece of that fat come off, and even a tiny piece, and go from, let's say, your carotid into your brain, and that causes a stroke, or it could happen in your vessels down here and into your heart. So I became aware of that also with having an ultrasound of my carotid arteries, something I normally wouldn't do or even think about. And my carotid arteries are a little bit blocked. Thank God they're not a lot blocked. But the theory is that one of the reasons why I could have this problem is because a piece of that blockage came off and went up to my brain. So now I want to clear out my arteries, and we can talk about that in a second.
All right. Yeah. So David, you had the problem you had, the pre-existing situation, like some blockages. Did that happen before you're raw vegan or after?
Okay. So this is an interesting story, and I'm glad you asked that. When this happened to me, and we're trying to keep things kind of short and to only emphasize the main points, I called one of my gurus, and I'll mention names, Colin Campbell, and a man that I really love and respect. And he was surprised also, but vegans die, and vegans have cardiovascular problems, heart attacks, and everything else. I'm sure you've heard stories about that. But he said, let me connect you with the expert. And the expert was a fellow named, and again, there were many people involved, but I'm just I'm emphasizing a few that were very important to me in my life. His name was Caldwell Esselstyn, Esselstyn, and just Google them and you'll see tons of videos. But anyway, he's a retired surgeon from Cleveland Clinic. He's still active, but he wrote a book called How to Prevent and Reverse Heart Disease that probably still is a bestseller a long time ago, and has dealt with patients over many years to corroborate what his belief is. And he connected with Colin because they both determined that epidemiologically diet played a huge role in health. Certainly not the only role, but a huge role in health. And Colin Campbell had the China study, longest nutritional study in history really, and most significant. And Colin himself, was a dairy farmer, became vegan, or mostly vegan, just shortly into his study. Forgive me, Colin, if I don't get this exactly right, but the results of diet was so significant that he actually changed his diet. Anyway, Dr. Esselstyn called me on the phone a few days after I spoke to Dr. Campbell, and he said, well, you might be having a very good diet now, but, and he said a few other things about raw food diet, which I won't talk about now, but he said, you were on a standard American diet when you were a kid, and you came from parents who most likely were on a standard American diet too. And so I said, what does that all mean? He said, well, you were eating in a way at that time that was already laying the groundwork for your stroke, and for many people, strokes and heart attacks and other cardiovascular problems and all other kinds of health problems. And what he was talking about was, if you eat a diet that's out of whack in terms of particularly fats, and other things that you mostly get on an animal diet, particularly a cooked animal diet around the world, you're going to lay the groundwork for problems. In his evidence, he mentioned that he had done autopsies of young people who might have died from something else, and found evidence of cardiovascular disease, in their blood vessels at a very young age, kids. And then there were autopsies done on soldiers, young soldiers, 16, 17, 18 years old, who got killed, and they showed the evidence of arterial plaque and problems that normally won't show up until much later in life. It's curious that most stroke and heart attacks start when you're like 60, 70. That's when it shows up, but the groundwork was laid when you were a child.
Wow. So David, does that mean I should just not even do raw vegan diet? Because I'm going to get a stroke anyways, and you can't fix it once you got the groundwork laid, and it's just inevitable, right?
Maybe a little bit, but the idea is that if your body is so powerful that if you do change the reasons why you're having health problems, no matter how bad you are, I don't care if you're on the deathbed with having had a severe heart attack, if you're still breathing, there's hope.
Yep.
And when you are, you don't want to be having a McDonald's and fries or a shake. You want to be having kale or wild arugula or green juice, because that's what we're really designed to be eating, and that's most harmonious with our bodies, and that'll help you get into a great healthful state. So there is hope, and I'll mention that these people are not raw, and they like a lot of aspects of the raw diet, and Dr. Esselstyn, Dr. Campbell, but they have other issues with the raw diet. But the main point is that it's about being vegan and not eating anything from an animal, and not eating anything unnatural like oils, any kind of oil, even olive oil. And I know people will say, "Oh, you're crazy." It's look at the Mediterranean diet and that. Well, those people have heart attacks too, and those people have strokes too. Maybe less than somebody who's eating beef and red meat every day, or deep fried this or that every day.
Yeah, so next let's get into the diet elements, especially in a raw food diet or even a vegan diet, that are very critical as to why this may have happened to you, David. The first one I want to talk about is fats. You've touched on this earlier, and can eating the wrong kind of fats, like the oil is the wrong kind of fat, or eating too many nuts and seeds, or the improper kind of nuts and seeds, have played a role in your specific situation, and how can we correct this as people into a raw plant-based diet?
Okay, to answer your question, very good question. There's many factors involved, but just try to, for the sake of time, to be as brief and concise as possible. As I said, one of the biggest problems with my blood work was to show me that my fats were out of whack. And although my omega-6, omega-3 ratio, which is a really critical piece of blood work, I advise anybody to do that. It costs like $50, and there's several places that do it. Just search online, omega-3 index, or AA/EPA ratio. AA being omega-6s and omega-3s being EPA. Omega-3 is DHA and EPA. You don't need to know what they stand for, but they're just types of fats. And you not have to eat fish to get omega-3s. They're in kale, in small quantities. But therapeutically, you can get them from flaxseed and chia seeds mainly. A little bit from hemp, but hemp has a lot of 6. So those are really the top nuts and seeds: chia first, flax ground up, and eaten, of course, fresh, and then maybe hemp. But I'll stick with flax and chia, not flax oil, but flax. Anyway, again, there's a lot to talk about, so I'll try to focus.
All right, David, so it sounds like we really need to focus on these omega-3s, because, I got my blood work tested with omega-3 to 6 balance, and I'm like, I got that tested probably like 5 years ago, and even me paying attention to my omega-3 to 6 balance, I was a little bit higher. I was lower than the average American, so that's good, but I want to be even lower and have a higher level of omega-3s, which are anti-inflammatory, versus the omega-6s. So is it really important to dial in and watch the types of fats we're eating? Like, we want to definitely get rid of the oils, but we can have some whole food sources of fats. But one of the predominant, fats on a raw foods diet, whole plant raw foods diet, is things like, sesame seeds and tahini, or like, sunflower seeds, or, almonds. Those are very, very, very high in omega-6s, and, that's probably not the best thing to do after hearing your information. And actually, I try not to eat a lot of those nuts and seeds too often.
Exactly, and I've stopped eating nuts and seeds except for chia and flax, until I can clear up my blood vessels. As we said, that my problem started a long time ago, before I was a raw vegan. You can get omega-3s from, as we said, chia and flaxseed ground up fresh. That ratio is key. It's something that came out of Harvard University. It's an easy study to do. I mentioned before, that's about $50. Just Google it. That'll tell you your ratio. As I said, mine was around 15 or 16 to 17 to 1. In Japan, the longest lived people in the world, in Okinawans, theirs is like a 3 to 1, or even 1.5. Ideally, some people say it should be 1 to 1. But the average American is somewhere in the 20s to 1. It's unbelievable. I got, in a matter of just months, like 4 months, I got mine down from I don't remember the exact number, 16 to 1 to right now it's 4 to 1. And I did that by stopping all oils, all nuts and seeds, except like a tablespoon or 2 of flax or chia every day. It had an amazing effect. And also being much aware of the sugars that I was eating in my fruit, because I don't eat any kind of sugar except fruit.
Yeah, so let's get into that for a second, David. I have another question regarding the fats. So we want to eat the right kind of fats, and also, I would encourage you guys, like I have, get your omega-3 to 6 ratio checked, and I would personally encourage everybody to be in definitely the single digits, for sure. The lower the better. And besides just like nuts and seeds, David, I know there's other sources of the essential fats, or omega-3s, or the more advanced types, such as the DHA and the EPA. and they're in things like the algae. That's where the fish get all their omega-3s, and they say, oh, you need fish for your omega-3s. Well, we just need to eat what the fish eats. We need to eat lower on the food chain, not higher on the food chain. So I know you're aware of like the different algae oils, and there's some problems with some of the algae oils out there, that people take for DHA and EPA, even some of the ones that some doctors recommend. You want to share your knowledge about this, because you've also researched this topic?
Yeah, very, very heavily. It's very hard to ferret out the true information, and it's very hard for us to get the kind of algae that salmon are eating, or much less get down there and eat it. We can eat it. It's certainly fine, and I'm a big fan of eating sea vegetables. So the algae, actually, there are a few species of algae that have very long, complicated names that supply huge amounts of omega-3s, maybe a little bit of 6s, and it's a huge commercial market. In the recent years, in the vegan community, getting omega fats is a blossoming industry, and there's a lot of companies out there providing it. The only problem, and I think this is what you were referring to, is a lot of the companies that make these products use methods that aren't really optimal. They'll use hexane or other chemicals to be able to dislodge the good fats that are really in oils. But again, these aren't bad kind of oils. Like I say, don't eat oils, but short of eating the actual algae in huge quantity, I don't mind having a quarter of a teaspoon of the oil from it, in addition to, once in a while, the flax and chia seeds would have every day. So once in a while I do a capsule of oil or eat a little bit of the oil. Anyway, I don't know if I should say the name of companies, but there's a few companies out there that make water processed oils from these algae. They give you, most importantly, DHA and some EPA. And again, the amount of it you should eat is a function of what your blood work is, not by what somebody's going to tell you should have. See what your blood work is, what your blood fat profile is, and then that'll determine whether you should have 4 grams a day or one little 300 millimeter capsule, milligram capsule. I would say, just if you're looking into omega-3/6 supplements, look for ones that are water processed, not hexane processed, and as least processed as possible, and are certainly vegan, and vegan capsules, or you can get the oil, or they sometimes come in drops. I think that's very beneficial.
Awesome, David. So the main thing about this section is, dial in your fats, eat whole food source of fat, eat them in small amounts, and more importantly, eat the right types for you based on your omega-6 and omega-3 testing. So David, the last part I want to get into, and I know this is really controversial because I have a lot of people out there that eat a lot of fruit, including myself, although just within the last 2 months I've made some dietary changes myself, actually pertaining to this, not knowing that this is what happened to David. Actually, I'll say publicly, I went from eating maybe 2 fruit meals a day, on a rare occasion 3, to like eating 1 fruit meal a day, like sweet fruit meal, and I don't count berries, so if I want to have berries as a meal, that doesn't really count because it's not super sweet, and trying to like really include more vegetables, because based on my research and I'm able to grow my vegetables and not my fruit, I still get it from conventional sources, that there's the fruit sugar, there's pros and cons to everything, and I'd rather eat some fruit and some fruit sugar than a Snickers bar, candy bar, diet cheese, and a whole bunch of other stuff out there. But I think the vegetables really are much more important, and actually with David's experience, this just kind of solidifies that for me. So David, what's the problem with the sugars in a raw foods diet today, and how can this be corrected or addressed? Okay,
it's a very good question, and one like John said is very controversial, and I think it's controversial because so many people are going to be honest and truthful. A lot of the information is not out there, and the point is, it's not just the fats that are the problem that we were just talking about, bad fats, which are in nuts like sunflower seeds, for example, versus chia seeds, the ratio of omega-6s, and all vegetable oils, the number of 6s are off the charts. That's one of the reasons why it's so bad to eat oil. And again, you listen to Dr. Novick from Preexisting Center or Dr. Esselstyn, they say no oil. They don't say it once, they scream it at their audience because people are just incredulous. You know olive oil? And but it's true, and they have the epidemiological study and the clinical experience to know this like they know their own name, but people who don't just can't believe it. I certainly had trouble hearing it the first time I heard this. I actually heard about olive oil years ago, but didn't pay any attention to it. I was wrong, and maybe that's part of the reason I had the stroke. Okay, so the issue with the sugar, it's not just the fats, it's the sugar in the fats, and to really make the long story short about the sugars, the problem with fruit today is that it's generally way too high in an out of whack, unfavorable nutritional array, meaning that fruit in general has been hybridized over many years by man. Now, of course, there's natural hybridization, which occurs, we all know that. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about doing things to generate cultivated fruit that travels well, that doesn't bruise too easily, that looks good, that is very sweet, because that's what people want. They want stuff that really tastes good to their jaded taste buds, which are used to things that are really sweet being good. It doesn't have to be, we're not really born that way. Yes, we're born to appreciate sweet things. The monkeys like sweet things, but when it's hugely sweet or artificially sweet, that's wrong for us. And anyways, the balance of sugars. So there's many different kinds of sugars, and like fructose, for example, is one type of sugar that's really harmful for us. And corn syrup is loaded with fructose, for example. But anyway, the array of nutrients gets changed by this hybridization process. And we wind up with something that tastes great to some people, doesn't taste good to me anymore, but the sweetness tastes great, but it's really not what it is in nature and what we're really designed to eat. Like big fat strawberries that are super sweet have absolutely nothing to do with our natural berry that was called a strawberry years ago, that today you could find them growing wild, and they call them fraises du bois. And you mentioned
or just alpine strawberries for us in the U.S.
Right, alpine strawberries as opposed to the super hybridized ones, or the big seedless watermelons and oranges that are big and fat and have very few seeds. I mean, a real orange is like a sour orange. It's full of seeds. It's not too sweet.
You can barely eat it.
Right, exactly. Makes great juice for salad dressing too, if you want to make an oil-free dressing. That's the problem. So the food generally, the cultivated food, has been worked on by man to make it more marketable for many reasons, and that's the problem with most of the fruit. And those sugars wreak havoc on your body, particularly if you have high fat or the wrong kind of fat balance in your body. There's a sugar and fats, I won't get into it now for the sake of time, but not that I'm the expert, you can check this out yourselves, but the sugars and fats really work together, particularly if you have too much fat and too much sugar of the wrong kinds. And that can contribute to cardiovascular plaque, among other problems. Mood issues, it's endless, and how much this is all interrelated. So that's the problem with the sugar. So I see John here at the festival enjoying his fruit, but he has it at one time like a mono meal, and I don't see him eating it all the time, and I watch what he does. Natural fruit, if you can find it, is the best way to go, and it doesn't taste like or look like most of the stuff that we're eating, that's the cultivated fruit that's in our fruit markets.
These are some of the factors that I want you guys to pay attention to, and I want to go ahead and review them really quickly for you. So number one, stress. Stress is definitely a killer. I'm no expert in means on stress. I've learned how to effectively deal with my stress being on this lifestyle path for the last 20 years. I want to encourage you guys to look into solutions for stress. Number two, pre-existing conditions. That we cannot change too much, but you can start today and improve your conditions. I mean, and that's what David's working on now. He had a challenge, and now he's working very hard to reverse the challenge. And it's always harder to do what David's doing instead of just making small, minute changes now, like eating less fruit, eating less fat and the right types of fats, so that you don't have this challenge, right? So yeah, your pre-existing health condition, and if you're gonna have babies, right, make sure they're whole food, plant-based from birth, and even before you're talking about even getting pregnant and all this stuff. Number three, the fats. Super critical, super important. I've talked about this before. I had Dr. Rick Dina on talking about essential fats, or fats essential in a raw foods diet, and eating the right type of fats, number one, and number two, very important, get tested to know where you are at. Whether that's B12, vitamin D, the essential fats, or other health indicators, get tested so that you know where you're at, so you can actually start making changes now instead of waiting to a catastrophic event or catastrophic events that may happen later. And number three, we all love fruit. I love fruit, but I want to ask you guys to reduce your fruit consumption. If you're eating 3 meals of fruit a day, I would really encourage you guys to move towards the vegetables. I'm now eating like 1 main fruit meal a day, and sometimes I try to even, minimize that and not do that. And, I try to eat more out of my garden. I'm not growing a whole lot of fruits in my garden. And when I do, I like to grow fruits that are a little bit different and not as sweet. Like I love the sweet gome fruit. That thing has probably no sugar in there, lots of antioxidants. Things like the loquat, which have huge seeds and barely any flesh. And if you get a good one, it's, kind of sweet. But these are the kind of more natural fruits we would eat before they started getting hybridized, before man started getting involved and making them super sweet. So reduce your food consumption. And on the flip side, increase your green consumption. The leafy greens are the most healing. And actually, David, I want you to share some of your favorite leafy greens, because actually you're on some of these leafy greens to help you with your condition. So what are these leafy greens and some of the new foods you're eating now to reverse the situation that you're currently in?
Okay, that's a very good point. And it's interesting that Dr. Esselstyn, who's not a raw foodist, tells his patients who have cardiovascular disease, like me, to eat greens. And he doesn't care whether it's raw or steamed, or if you do cook them, just cook them a little bit, 5 or 6 times a day. I said, what? And he says, yeah, a fistful 5 or 6 times a day to keep bathing your body with all the antioxidants and beneficial nutrients that are in greens. And I thought that was very interesting that he would talk about that. I mean, it's all about greens, and while it's true that the higher you go, like the bonobos, monkeys that are closest to us, eat mostly fruit, and gorillas eat mostly greens. The fruit that a bonobo eats is not the same kind of fruit we get from the supermarket, but the point is they're eating a lot of greens too. They forage all day, which, before I answer your question, it brings up an interesting point that really should be mentioned. It's about calories. If you don't eat a lot of sweet fruit, most likely you're going to see a big drop in your caloric intake. And for you to make that up with the most important thing is greens and vegetables, you'd have to be eating a ton of them. So you could juice them and get in more that way, but still you're really not going to do that. So you have to be very careful about your caloric intake. I'm in favor of this concept of 80-10-10, and this has been around before the book about it was written. But naturally in fruits and vegetables, what's the breakdown in terms of carbohydrates, fats, and proteins? It's not what most people are eating. But if you don't eat a lot of sweet fruit because you're watching your blood sugar and still get your calories, I don't think there's anything wrong with having some sprouted garbanzo beans or some what can I say, even whole oats if they're non-gluten, like oatmeal even, a little bit now and then, or if you're going to cook anything, to steam it lightly. Raw is still the best by far, but if you have to make up calories and you have to eat beans or legumes, then do it. You don't have to be 100% raw. You could be 90% raw, 80% raw, still get the benefit until you can find real fruit. Like John would say, grow your own. Get really good fruit. Is not too nutritionally compromised, where the sugars are still in the correct balances and not super sweet. You get calories that way, but until then, if you have to supplement a little bit with some beans, it's better that you have more beans than sunflower seeds or almonds, which are fine a little bit. But the way people eat nuts in the raw food movement, again, puts too much of the wrong fats in your body, and it can lead to what happened to me. I used to eat nut pâtés. I see people here scooping out raw nut butters. We're not designed to eat that kind of quantity of nuts and seeds.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree, and I would also agree with David. I mean, I'm all raw, and that's what I prefer. But for you guys, and I wish my parents would eat like David's talking about, with some beans and a lot of raw and some beans, and actually not eat too many fruits. Especially as I find people get a little bit more mature and a little bit, older in age, they do much better on this style diet than like a high fruit diet, unless their body is used to it.
So I support the raw food diet. I think the raw food is the best way to go if it's done correctly. I'll mention one other person who I think is quite significant in my life. His name is Dr. Fred Bisci, B-I-S-C-I. Here's somebody in his mid-80s who's seen the fruitarians and these people in their entire lives, and can tell you which ones are dead and which ones are still living and why. He wrote a book called Your Healthy Journey, which I think I recommend to most people to read. And he's a raw foodist for I don't know how many years, 40-something years.
Awesome, David. So let's get into those greens. One of the things is I have found the power of greens for at least the last 10 plus years. I mean, I have a YouTube channel called Growing Your Greens, because I want you guys, besides the fruit, which are good, I think the greens are better than the fruit personally. And it's kind of hard and challenging if you don't have a lot of space to grow fruit trees, but you could easily grow all your greens in a whole spectrum of different greens that even money can't buy. So yeah, learn how to grow your greens at growingyourgreens.com, or the YouTube channel. But David, what are some of the most important greens that you're taking to help with your situation, other greens and other vegetables?
Right. Okay. So fruits, the vegetables are extremely important, including greens. Like you said, not that there aren't good nutrients in fruit, but on balance, really the greens are more important for us for a lot of reasons we won't go into now for time considerations. But of course, kale. Everybody knows about kale, but and the lacinato kale or dinosaur kale is better for you than the curly kale, by the way. And also the darker the colors, the better it is. Iceberg lettuce definitely has some value, but nothing like a piece of purple kale. Okay, so kale, bok choy, collard greens. By far one of the most underrated greens out there on the planet that really needs to have the light shown on it is arugula. Closest thing to a wild green, the real original greens that were in nature.
And they have wild arugula. Like I'm growing like about a half dozen varieties of arugula, including wild arugula.
Right, and an amazing thing about arugula is if you really get into this, and I wish, it's such a complex issue in a way, but in another way it's really simple. We just don't have time to get into the whole thing. But there's something called nitric oxide. If you don't know what nitric oxide is, just Google it, start reading. Question the source of the information though. But nitric oxide is a gas that's produced in your body inside your blood by endothelial tissue. Endothelial tissue is the inner lining of the blood vessels. It kind of has a lot to do with how the vessel expands and contracts, which affects blood pressure and responses to stressors. Nitric oxide is key, and we make some nitric oxide, and mostly from in the mouth, bacteria in the mouth, certain things that happen to create nitric oxide, but certain foods have extraordinary ability to create nitric oxide, and by that I mean make you calmer, give you more energy, allow more oxygen to be carried by your blood. Like for some of you, you might be aware of the fact in the Olympics, particularly recent Olympics, people have been drinking beet juice right before they perform, because about an hour later your body kind of clicks into a high gear, and boy, you've got a little bit of an edge because you're carrying more oxygen in your blood, and you're able to achieve a greater result because of this. Well, beets are great for nitric oxide, but they have too much sugar, unfortunately. But probably the #1 nitric oxide producing food that's readily available to all of us is arugula. So look at that, arugula makes you work the best possible way. So I just want to mention that. But so those are key greens, and again, kale, collard, bok choy, arugula, and then all the rest of them, spinach. But a ton of spinach is more problematic than a ton of arugula. Arugula doesn't have oxalic acid issues. If you don't know what that is, just Google it. So arugula really is better than spinach. It should have been Popeye and arugula instead of spinach out of the can. But all those greens, if it's dark, leafy, and comes out of the ground, boy, and most of those, there's very few greens that grow wild like that we wouldn't be attracted to and that would be harmful for us. I mean, watch the primates go around, they're just stripping leaves off of branches as they forage their whole day. And they're getting a lot of exercise foraging, which doesn't happen today when you go to the supermarket, buy a bag of nuts or a box of nut butter, a jar of nut butter, and then you're gobbling down all these calories from bad fat, or you're eating oil. It's not natural. Anyway, this is what this is about. But growing in greens, highly recommend growing your own greens, particularly the dark leafy greens.